March 17th, 1944. A moonless night hung over the outskirts of Kitzingen, Germany. The wind carried a biting chill across the airfield, rustling the bare trees and rattling the loose metal of maintenance sheds. Inside a hangar, 3 Luftwaffe test pilots, assigned to the Secret Evaluation Division of the Reich Air Ministry, leaned over a strange silhouette unlike anything they had seen before. It was American, unfamiliar, and yet immediately intimidating. The P-61 Black Widow. The aircraft rested on its landing gear, twin booms stretching from the wings like outstretched arms, a fuselage shaped like a predator built for stealth and lethality. The Germans had flown countless captured aircraft, from Spitfires to P-51s to B-17s, but this was different. Even unarmed, the Black Widow radiated purpose. Oberleutnant Kurt Stahl, a veteran test pilot with over 180 combat missions on the Eastern Front, ran his gloved hand along the massive wing route. "It is monstrous," he muttered. The Americans had designed it with night fighting in mind, a role the Luftwaffe had barely scratched despite decades of experience. Stahl's colleague, Leutnant Wilhelm Heinsberg, noted the fuselage's radar dome and the prominent nose housing the SCR-720. "Night combat will never be the same," he said, his voice low, tinged with a mix of disbelief and admiration. The first flight would test more than aerodynamics. It would measure something far less tangible, the technological gap that had emerged across the Atlantic. The P-61's Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engines, 2,000 horsepower each, sat like twin heartbeats under the wing nacelles. To a Luftwaffe pilot accustomed to the BMW 801 or the Daimler-Benz 601, these engines promised something the Luftwaffe rarely prioritized: sustained power at high altitudes for prolonged night operations. No longer would interceptors be limited by short bursts of speed or quick climbs. This was an aircraft built for endurance and lethality. The test pilots were briefed by the Americans themselves, reluctant but impressed by their adversaries' own honesty. Major Richard Haines, a decorated night fighter ace, had flown the P-61 across the Pacific and over Europe and had agreed to demonstrate its capabilities in controlled circumstances. The Germans, still wary, watched as the radar technician calibrated the SCR-720. "Range, 20 miles, Haines said. "Resolution, small bomber-sized target, 10,000 feet, any bearing. You can see him here." He pointed to the green sweep of the radar screen in the cockpit. Stahl leaned in. A blip, small, fleeting, danced across the screen. "That," Haines said, "is what the Luftwaffe has been doing by instinct for years. This does it by science." They climbed into the cockpit, taking their positions. Stahl at the pilot's yoke, Heinsberg monitoring the radar, and the third pilot, Oberfeldwebel Dietrich Vogel, seated behind to operate the aft guns. The canopy slid over them with a soft hiss, and the engines roared to life. Even at idle, the vibrations were different, smoother, more controlled than any twin-engine aircraft the Germans had flown. The tailwheel retracted, and the nose radar hummed faintly, scanning for targets invisible in the inky darkness. Takeoff was uneventful but commanding. The P-61 accelerated with the quiet confidence of a predator, its twin booms slicing the night. Stahl noted the stability in climb and the absence of torque roll that had plagued lesser aircraft. At 15,000 feet, he reduced throttle to cruise, and the aircraft seemed to glide effortlessly. Heinsberg, operating the radar, caught his first blip. A B-17 converted for training maneuvers. "Contact bearing 30, he reported. Stahl banked slightly, bringing the P-61 into position. The German's eyes widened as the Black Widow revealed its true purpose. The radar allowed Heinsberg to guide Stahl with precision through the dark, unseen. "You could close in on a bomber in pitch black and not need moonlight, searchlights, or flares," Heinsberg said. Vogel manned the 450 caliber machine guns mounted in the ventral turret. When a B-17 appeared on the radar at 20 degrees, 40 miles out, Vogel's guns were already tracking, ready to fire before the target was even visible. The test flight continued with a series of maneuvers designed to test the aircraft's handling, radar integration, and weapon systems. The Germans had expected a large, ungainly aircraft, slow and cumbersome, an American milk bottle of sorts, but what they found was something far more sophisticated. The Black Widow was heavy, yes, but its mass was used cleverly. It had inertia, stability, and the ability to absorb turbulence without compromising precision. In a dive, The twin booms stayed true, the fuselage holding steady, as though it were welded from a single piece of steel. After 45 minutes, the first engagement simulation began. A drone aircraft, modified to resemble a Japanese twin-engine night bomber, entered from the east. Heinsberg guided Stahl into intercept, and the P-61's radar allowed them to approach silently, unseen until the last possible moment. Vogel's turret locked automatically onto the blip, guns primed. The Americans instructed them on the fire control system. The guns were slave to the radar, calculating lead, distance, and bullet drop in real time. Stahl followed Heinsberg's directions, and in a heartbeat, the first simulated burst was fired. The target aircraft disintegrated on screen, and even the Germans, hardened by war and experience, could not suppress a murmur of astonishment. "This is incredible," Vogel said, voice trembling. He had fired at hundreds of enemy aircraft over Russia, yet nothing compared to the precision and lethality of the Black Widow's fire control. The radar-guided turret ensured the aft guns could hit any target without visual confirmation, a concept almost unthinkable to pilots who had relied on instinct and experience for survival. It's like the aircraft sees for you," Stahl admitted, adjusting the throttle. But radar was only part of the story. The Americans had designed the P-61 around multiple overlapping advantages: firepower, survivability, and night detection. The fuselage could withstand damage that would down a Me-110 or Ju-88 in seconds. The engines, heavily armored, could continue running even when struck. Vogel's turret could track targets independently, allowing a single P-61 to cover an entire formation. This integration of systems, the pilot, radar operator, gunner, created an aerial combat triad that German engineers had never considered. The flight concluded with a controlled landing, the P-61 rolling smoothly down the runway despite its weight and twin engines. The Germans emerged from the cockpit pale but exhilarated. The reports they would submit in the coming weeks were cautious but revealing. "It flies like a predator hunting in darkness," Stahl wrote. "The combination of radar and slaved armament makes night interception predictable, almost methodical. What we have taken years to develop through tactics, they have embedded into a machine." In the hangar, the pilots examined the aircraft with renewed curiosity. The twin booms housed more than engines. They were structural beams, weapons conduits, and housing for fuel and avionics. The fuselage, once described as bulbous and strange, now seemed purposeful. Every rivet, every panel, every sensor had been placed for function. The Germans began to understand that night fighting would never be the same. Even if they had every experienced ace and every night fighter tactic in the world, the P-61's combination of radar guidance, firepower, and integrated systems rendered conventional defense obsolete. Over the following weeks, the Luftwaffe evaluated the aircraft in simulation and comparative tests. They found that a single P-61 could, in theory, track and destroy an entire formation of night bombers with minimal visual contact. German night fighters, by contrast, relied on limited ground-controlled radar and visual spotting, tactics that were slow, reactive, and often ineffective against high-flying, radar-equipped opponents. Oberleutnant Stahl's notes became increasingly candid. "We have always prized skill, intuition, and bravery. The P-61 bypasses all of it. You do not fly against it, you are managed by it." By May 1944, word of the evaluation reached the higher echelons of the Reich Air Ministry. Reports emphasized not only the aircraft's technical superiority, but also the psychological impact. Luftwaffe test pilots admitted privately that their entire approach to night operations would require revision. Tactics honed over years of nocturnal combat, vectoring fighters by searchlight, lining up bombers visually, predicting evasive maneuvers, were now antiquated. Radar-directed, turret-armed, and structurally resilient, the Black Widow represented a new paradigm, a night fighter designed to dominate from detection to destruction. June 2nd, 1944. The Rhine Valley lay shrouded in fog, a ghostly expanse illuminated only by scattered searchlights and the faint glimmer of moonlight breaking through high clouds. Luftwaffe engineers had gathered once more at Kitzingen for extended testing of the P-61 Black Widow. This time, the evaluations were no longer casual inspections. They were operational simulations, designed to explore the aircraft's limits under realistic night combat conditions. Oberleutnant Kurt Stahl climbed into the cockpit with a mixture of apprehension and grim fascination. The previous tests had left a mark on every German pilot involved. Even seasoned veterans, men who had flown the Me-110, Heinkel He-2119, and Ju-88 night fighters, found themselves unsettled by the aircraft's capabilities. Stahl had never seen a machine combine radar, firepower, and raw physical resilience in such a coherent package. Every lever, every gauge, every electronic display in the P-61 screamed purpose. This was more than an aircraft. It was a weapon system, a flying command post, and a tactical controller, all in one. At 20,000 feet, the twin engines purred under throttle adjustments, each one pushing the aircraft into the stratosphere with ease. The Germans noted the absence of the torque-heavy tendencies that plagued the Luftwaffe's twin-engine fighters. The P-61's weight distribution, a product of careful engineering, gave it remarkable stability even during sharp turns and high-speed dives. It was as if the aircraft anticipated the pilot's intentions, translating human input into a symphony of controlled motion. Heinsberg sat in the radar operator's seat, eyes fixed on the green sweep of the SCR-720. On the horizon, small, flickering blips represented drones acting as enemy bombers, each simulating evasive maneuvers typical of Allied formations. The radar was precise, even the slightest course change was detected, calculated, and relayed to Stahl within seconds. German engineers, scribbling notes furiously, struggled to comprehend the integration. No Me-110 or Ju-88, no matter how heavily modified, could replicate this kind of precision-guided night interception. The first engagement sequence began. The P-61 approached a simulated bomber formation from below, guided entirely by radar. In the aft turret, Vogel prepared the 50-caliber machine guns, which were slaved directly to the radar system. "Target locked," he reported, voice taut with concentration. A controlled burst sent tracer rounds converging on the lead drone. The German engineers watched the impact live on the cockpit monitor. The drone disintegrated instantly, wings separating from fuselage, debris scattering across the simulated sky. "This is unreal," Stahl murmured. Even though the exercise was a simulation, the effectiveness of the P-61's radar-guided guns was undeniable. The Germans had prided themselves on tactical ingenuity, vectoring night fighters based on limited ground radar, coordinating intercepts by intuition and experience, but the P-61 operated in a different realm. It didn't rely on guesswork or luck. It calculated, predicted, and executed. Human error became almost irrelevant. The evaluation quickly moved to maneuvering tests. The Germans wanted to see how the Black Widow would handle aggressive defensive maneuvers from enemy bombers. Stahl initiated steep climbs, high-speed dives, and rapid rolls, testing the aircraft's response under extreme conditions. The P-61 absorbed every input without hesitation. The twin booms flexed slightly, the fuselage remained rigid, and the engines maintained full power without fluctuation. The Americans had designed the aircraft not just for lethality, but survivability. Even if hit by defensive fire, the P-61 could maintain course and continue to operate, a feature German pilots found unnerving. Vogel, operating the turret, began simulated tracking of multiple targets simultaneously. Where Luftwaffe gunners struggled with a single maneuvering bomber, the P-61's automated systems allowed Vogel to maintain locks on 3 targets at once. The radar calculated lead angles, bullet drop, and range corrections in real time, feeding directly to the guns. It was a level of integration German engineers could only dream of. Oberleutnant Stahl's report later read, "This aircraft is not merely flown, it manages the battle for you." Over the next 2 weeks, the Luftwaffe conducted repeated evaluations, each revealing new facets of the Black Widow's design brilliance. The fuselage construction, composed of reinforced duralumin with strategically placed armor, allowed the aircraft to absorb hits that would have destroyed any Me-110 or Ju-88. Engine nacelles were reinforced, fuel tanks self-sealing, and electronic systems hardened against vibration and temperature extremes. The radar itself, protected by a streamlined nose dome, continued functioning even when struck by simulated small arms fire. Perhaps most concerning to German pilots was the P-61's combination of speed, altitude, and endurance. Unlike the Luftwaffe's night fighters, which struggled to maintain speed above 25,000 feet, The Black Widow retained full engine output at 30,000 feet and could intercept high-flying bombers with ease. In dives, the aircraft could reach 370 miles per hour without structural compromise, turning its mass from a perceived weakness into a tactical advantage. In practice, it allowed P-61 pilots to approach from above, strike with devastating firepower, and disengage before the defenders could respond. Radar interception trials produced similar results. German engineers simulated bomber streams at varying altitudes and headings. Even with multiple aircraft, the P-61 could detect, track, and coordinate attack vectors autonomously. The crew remained focused on execution rather than navigation, with the radar system predicting maneuvers and suggesting optimal firing positions. It was a revelation. Night fighting had always been a human-centric affair, relying on intuition, experience, and communication. The Black Widow shifted the balance toward machine-guided supremacy, turning human skill into a secondary factor. By the end of June, the Luftwaffe's internal assessments were grim. Oberleutnant Stahl, normally measured in his reports, admitted that the P-61's firepower and radar would render traditional night fighter tactics obsolete. Leutnant Heinsberg concurred, noting that the aircraft's sensors could detect and engage bombers at ranges and altitudes that German night fighters could not safely approach. Even the He-219, often lauded as Germany's premier night fighter, appeared inadequate when stacked against the Black Widow's combination of radar, speed, and heavy .50 caliber armament. The psychological impact was equally significant. Test pilots who had flown hundreds of missions found themselves unnerved by the machine's capabilities. The idea of approaching a bomber formation under cover of darkness, only to be detected and destroyed by a radar-directed turret, challenged every principle of night combat they had internalized. Oberfeldwebel-Vogel's diary entry captured the sentiment. "We have trained for years to strike at night, to confuse and evade. The Black Widow eliminates confusion. It calculates everything. Skill, courage, intuition, all irrelevant. A bomber never leaves the screen alive." German engineers attempted to dissect the technology, probing the radar, the fire control systems, and the integration of twin engines with aircraft mass and aerodynamics. They were impressed but also frustrated. Every advance had been anticipated, every flaw accounted for. The P-61 was not a patchwork design. It was an end-to-end system built around a single operational philosophy: dominate the night sky. Each component, radar, weapons, engine, structure, was optimized to function in concert, creating a sum far greater than its parts. By the final evaluation, the Germans acknowledged a sobering reality. The P-61 would change night fighting forever. Any hope of matching it with conventional aircraft or traditional tactics was unlikely. They had tested its capabilities, observed its precision, and assessed its survivability. And in every case, the Black Widow had outperformed expectations. The machine was no longer just an aircraft. It was a tactical concept made real. Night fighting, once the domain of cunning pilots and improvised tactics, had been fundamentally transformed. July 14, 1944. The Luftwaffe's Kitzingen testing range had become a theater of controlled chaos. Simulated night raids with multiple bomber formations allowed German engineers to observe the P-61 under conditions that approximated real combat. Oberleutnant Kurt Stahl, increasingly unnerved by what he was witnessing, prepared for another sortie. The aircraft gleamed under the moonlight, the twin booms slicing through shadows as if preordained to dominate the night. The first sequence began with a formation of 12 simulated B-17s crossing the valley at 24,000 feet. German pilots, attempting to replicate the traditional intercept tactics they had refined for years, were immediately at a disadvantage. Their Mi-110s and Ju-88s relied on ground radar vectors and visual sightings, navigating in pitch darkness with limited communication. Meanwhile, the P-61's SCR-720 radar constantly swept the sky, providing real-time targeting data directly to the radar operator's gun sight. Lieutenant Heinsberg watched, wide-eyed, as the radar detected and tracked every aircraft, predicting each bomber's trajectory with startling accuracy. The guns linked to the system adjusted automatically for range, closure speed, and bullet drop. Vogel, the turret gunner, barely moved his hands, his role reduced to confirming engagement as the weapons system did the heavy lifting. In seconds, simulated bombs dropped by the P-61 struck precise points on each drone target. German engineers noted the devastation, taking hundreds of measurements and calculations for later analysis. Unbelievable, muttered Oberfeldwebel Dietrich Koller, a test pilot who had flown the Mi-110 for over 200 missions. A single P-61 could engage multiple bombers simultaneously while remaining undetected. It was a statement that encapsulated the growing fear among Luftwaffe personnel. The aircraft was not only lethal, it was efficient, designed to maximize kill probability while minimizing exposure to return fire. Traditional night fighter doctrine, which relied heavily on human judgment and limited instruments, had no equivalent. Over the next several sorties, the Germans explored the P-61's performance envelope. They tested high-speed dives from 30,000 feet, rapid climbs, and complex evasive maneuvers. In every instance, the Black Widow responded predictably and reliably. The twin R-2800 engines provided consistent thrust, while the airframe absorbed forces that would have shredded lesser aircraft. Even when subjected to simulated hits from defensive fire, the aircraft maintained structural integrity and operational capability. Oberleutnant Stahl, normally precise and measured in his assessments, wrote simply in his report, "This aircraft refuses to fail." The radar system remained the focal point of concern. It was not simply a detector. It was a targeting computer, continuously calculating lead angles and convergence distances. The German night fighters, accustomed to manually plotting intercepts based on visual or ground-based data, were astounded by the speed and precision of the P-61's engagements. One engineer noted in his log, "We have instruments that measure, but never systems that think. The Black Widow thinks." The combination of electronics and firepower allowed a single aircraft to engage multiple targets, each within a separate kill envelope, without degradation of accuracy. Night fighter tactics had always emphasized coordination, wingmen protecting each other, careful spacing to avoid collisions, precise timing to intercept bombers before they reached critical points. The Black Widow upended every one of these conventions. One aircraft, flown by an American-trained test pilot posing as a German operator, simulated a lone P-61 against a dozen drones. Within minutes, 4 were neutralized, with the remaining 8 forced to abort the simulated mission entirely. The efficiency and lethality left no doubt. Night fighting would never be the same. Armament tests revealed further surprises. The P-61's 4 fixed 50 caliber machine guns in the nose, coupled with twin 50 caliber turrets, created a combined rate of fire that German engineers had never encountered. Calculations showed that a single burst could saturate a 100-foot radius with enough firepower to destroy multiple bombers at once. Unlike Luftwaffe designs, which relied on brief, high-velocity cannon bursts, the P-61 delivered sustained, accurate fire without overheating or jamming. The Germans had assumed machine guns were inferior to cannons in destructive capacity. The Black Widow disproved that assumption with horrifying efficiency. Even the psychological impact on pilots was clear. Test flights included simulated defensive reactions from German night fighter crews. Attempts to evade the P-61, whether through climbing, diving, or sharp turns, were met with precise radar adjustments and sustained fire. Pilots reported a feeling of helplessness. The Black Widow could track and engage from angles previously thought safe, making traditional escape maneuvers ineffective. Oberleutnant Stahl noted in his log, "We trained to survive the night. Against this aircraft, survival is a gamble." Fuel endurance and operational range were also analyzed. While many German night fighters were constrained by fuel limitations at high altitudes, the P-61 retained efficient cruise settings even while operating engines at high power. It could remain on station for extended periods, providing continuous coverage without refueling. This capability amplified its tactical value. A single P-61 could dominate an entire sector, maintaining radar coverage and lethal engagement for hours, something the Luftwaffe could not replicate. By mid-July, German engineers compiled a comprehensive assessment. The report, classified and circulated only among senior command, outlined a sobering reality. The P-61 was not just another aircraft, it was a system designed to erase conventional night fighting advantages. Radar, Integrated weapons, robust structure, and superior engine performance combined to create a platform unmatched in operational effectiveness. The report concluded existing doctrine is insufficient. New tactics, new aircraft, or avoidance of engagement are the only options. Field trials further reinforced these conclusions. In simulated multi-aircraft encounters, even experienced pilots who had flown hundreds of night missions struggled to maintain control and situational awareness. The P-61's combination of speed, altitude capability, and precise radar guidance forced defenders into reactive, defensive patterns. Success depended not on skill alone, but on anticipating the machine's capabilities, something German pilots found nearly impossible. The psychological element was unmistakable. Oberfeldwebel Vogel, the turret gunner, commented during a debrief, "Even when we know it is a simulation, the feeling of being hunted is inescapable. The Black Widow does not fly, it hunts." Test pilots reported elevated heart rates, tension, and a pervasive sense of inevitability. The aircraft had become a benchmark not merely in engineering, but in the mindset of modern night fighting. By the end of July 1944, the Luftwaffe's internal consensus was unanimous. The P-61 Black Widow represented a paradigm shift. Its capabilities forced German engineers to reconsider the fundamentals of night operations. Where once pilots relied on intuition, coordination, and limited electronics, the Black Widow offered a fully integrated, automated solution. Every variable, speed, altitude, firepower, radar, was optimized for dominance in the dark. Even in theoretical engagements against multiple German night fighters, the P-61 emerged as a decisive force. Simulations showed that the Black Widow could intercept formations undetected, neutralize several bombers before any counterattack, and exit safely, all while remaining within operational range. Its combination of durability, firepower, and electronic precision left no comparable Luftwaffe platform. By the final debrief, Oberleutnant Stahl's assessment was blunt. Night fighting, as we have known it, is obsolete. The P-61 is not merely an aircraft. It is a harbinger of what the future of aerial combat will look like. Resistance is possible, but parity is impossible. Even the most conservative engineers acknowledged the machine's supremacy. Observing the Black Widow's flight patterns, engagement accuracy, and damage resilience, they concluded that any Luftwaffe night fighter would face insurmountable challenges. The Germans began documenting lessons learned. Tactics, engagement protocols, and pilot training would need complete revision if they were to counter the P-61 in any operational theater. Their conclusion was chilling. The Black Widow was more than a fighter. It was a technological revolution, one that had arrived too late for the Luftwaffe to counter effectively. August 2nd, 1944. Kitzingen. The final scheduled test of the Luftwaffe's P-61 evaluation program approached under a moonless sky. A dozen German pilots, each seasoned in hundreds of night sorties over Europe, prepared for the last exercise. What they faced was no longer theoretical. This flight would push the Black Widow to every limit they could conceive, a crucible of speed, firepower, and electronics that would either confirm their growing dread or, by some miracle, reveal a flaw. The P-61 rolled down the runway, twin R-2800 engines throbbing like mechanical heartbeats in the darkness. Oberleutnant Stahl, now almost reverent in his observation, watched as the Black Widow accelerated, lifted, and vanished into the night with ease. The radar operator, Lieutenant Vogel, settled into his station, his eyes scanning the luminescent dials that painted a digital map of the surrounding sky. The Germans attempted to coordinate an intercept, plotting vectors as if the night itself were a chessboard. From the first moments, the results were staggering. The P-61 detected every approach vector before visual contact, its SCR-720 radar predicting evasive maneuvers and adjusting targeting data with uncanny precision. Turret fire synchronized automatically, engaging multiple simulated bombers at once. The German pilots, relying on visual cues and instinct honed by years of combat, were immediately at a disadvantage. The P-61's speed, altitude flexibility, and calculated firing sequences rendered traditional defensive tactics obsolete. Attempts at countermaneuvers, diving, climbing, sharp lateral turns, were met with near-perfect tracking. For every evasive motion, the Black Widow's radar compensated. delivering bursts of .50 caliber fire with surgical accuracy. Simulated ordnance detonations confirmed the destructive capability. A single engagement erased entire formations within seconds. Oberfeldwebel Dietrich Koller, normally composed, muttered aloud, "It hunts, and nothing escapes its will." The twin-boom airframe, designed for stability and control, proved nearly invulnerable to structural stress. High-speed dives, rapid altitude changes, and tight banking maneuvers were absorbed without strain. Even when subjected to simulated battle damage, the P-61 remained controllable. German engineers, meticulously documenting every parameter, noted that comparable aircraft would have suffered catastrophic failure under identical conditions. For the final phase, the Luftwaffe arranged a combined exercise. 2 squadrons of Me-1110s, a Ju-88 formation, and a pair of single-engine Bf-109 night fighters simulated a coordinated raid. The Black Widow intercepted alone, radar-guided, using both nose and turret fire in conjunction with the radar targeting system. Within minutes, the German aircraft were accounted for, some destroyed in simulation, others forced to disengage entirely. Observers, engineers, and pilots alike were silent. The efficiency was beyond comprehension. In the debrief that followed, Oberleutnant Stahl's words were measured but carried the weight of awe. Night fighting, as we understood it, is finished. The Black Widow has erased decades of doctrine, training, and experience. It is not merely a weapon, it is a system. A single aircraft controls the night as if it were a dominion granted by design. His fellow pilots, once the vanguard of the Luftwaffe's night operations, nodded in grim agreement. There was no hyperbole in their admission. The P-61 was a revelation. Further analysis emphasized 3 immutable truths. First, the SCR-720 radar, integrated with the fire control system, allowed real-time, predictive targeting that eliminated the need for visual acquisition in most engagements. Second, the aircraft's firepower, 4 fixed .50 caliber machine guns and twin .50 caliber turrets, created a kill zone that no conventional night fighter could penetrate without catastrophic loss. Third, the twin R-2800 engines provided unmatched performance at altitude, allowing sustained combat operations beyond the reach of any contemporary Luftwaffe design. Even German engineers, steeped in technological expertise, found themselves impressed and unnerved. A report circulated among senior command concluded, "This aircraft represents a fundamental shift in aerial combat. It will dominate night operations where it is deployed. Countermeasures require a reevaluation of all current doctrine and aircraft design." It was a statement that, had it been widely disseminated earlier, might have altered strategy, but for the Luftwaffe in mid-1944, it was already too late. The psychological impact was equally significant. Pilots described a sense of inevitability when facing the P-61. Training, experience, and tactics, all that had once provided confidence in night engagements, were rendered largely irrelevant against a machine designed to think, detect, and destroy faster than human reflexes allowed. As one veteran test pilot summarized, "Even at the moment you know it is coming, you cannot stop it. Survival is no longer skill, it is luck." By the end of August, the Luftwaffe's formal evaluation concluded. The P-61 Black Widow was, unequivocally, the most capable night fighter in existence. Its combination of radar, firepower, and endurance had rewritten the rules of nocturnal aerial warfare. In every scenario, from single-bomber interceptions to multi-aircraft engagements, it outperformed, outgunned, and outlasted anything Germany could deploy. The conclusion was unavoidable. Night fighting would never be the same. In subsequent years, captured German reports and debriefings confirmed the lasting impression left by these evaluations. Engineers marveled at the system integration, pilots admitted the Black Widow's effectiveness, and analysts acknowledged that the aircraft's very existence had shifted operational paradigms. While it would never see widespread Luftwaffe deployment, the lessons learned were incorporated into post-war aviation studies. The P-61's blend of technological foresight and raw firepower became a benchmark against which all subsequent night fighters were measured. The final assessment, recorded in August 1944, was unambiguous. The P-61 Black Widow represents the future. It is the first fighter designed around integrated radar, electronic targeting, and multi-axis engagement capability. Its presence ensures dominance in the night skies. Any engagement against it with existing platforms is strategically compromised. German pilots, even those who had faced the most formidable adversaries over Europe, agreed this was an aircraft that changed everything. And so, under the shroud of darkness above Kitzingen, the P-61 completed its trials, leaving a legacy of awe, fear, and recognition. It had demonstrated that night fighting could no longer rely on human reflex alone, that technology could define victory, and that an aircraft built around radar, endurance, and firepower could render conventional tactics obsolete. For the Luftwaffe, it was a revelation they could not match. For aviation history, it marked the dawn of a new era, an era in which the night itself belonged to machines like the P-61 Black Widow. The night fell, silent, save for the distant hum of engines. In the logs, the final line captured the sentiment perfectly. We have seen the future of night combat, and it is terrifying.